Okay, welcome back. This this portion of the week's lecture has to do with section um was it section three, I believe. Section three, which is the project life cycle methodology and phase plan. It's the management approach. It's the management approach. It's the view that says this was what my project looks like. So the reason I use air quotes on looks like is because you can't see the project. I mean, you can see the end result, obviously, but the project management plan is something you can see. It describes how the project's going to be planned and unfolded, executed, and monitored and controlled. However, it's not the thing. Sometimes people will say, I can see the project by describing the budget, right? The time phase budget over time, the life cycle of the project, it's going to be worth X amount of dollars. So that would be one way of looking at it. The schedule might be another way of looking at the project and describing it to somebody. Well, this is a 5-year plan, and we have research and development for the first 2 years, and then we move into prototyping for a year, and then we go into execution, and then we deliver a rocket at the end of it, right? So that might be a way to describe your project as well. This version, I think, is probably the cleanest. And the way you describe your project is by describing its life cycle, its overall phase plan, what it looks like. And so we're going to discuss what that is. And then we're going to go through specific types of methodologies and methodologies that you may choose for your class project and you will for your class project and your group project. Then we'll also talk about Scrum, agile processing versus predictive processing. And what this overall thing is called is the software development life cycle, or SDLC. So SDLC would be that portion of the management approach that will be described inside of our project management plan. And it will roughly describe what the project looks like. Okay, so here we go. First slide. We have to understand that your project is not done all in one fell swoop. You can't swallow an elephant in one bite. You have to break it up into pieces, right? That's how we do problem solving. We take the overall problem, break it into workable parts of the solution, and then those might be broken down into multiple parts of the solution as well. So your project will have to have some kind of methodology, some kind of rational reason that describes what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, in what kind of order, if you will, from the beginning of its early stages, from conception, all the way through development and execution and delivery and final termination of the project. That is called the entire life cycle, and it looks differently. In fact, the way it looks different over time is called its phases, right? Our life is born, so we're babies in a phase of our life, right? We have certain things that we can do and not do. Then we go into adolescence, and then we go into maturity and adulthood and senior citizen status and whatnot. So that's the end of that life cycle. But each of those are phases. Okay, so our project is going to be much like that. And so the way we look at it, each of those phases become very important to describe so that we know what is going to be done inside of that phase, right? So in the beginning of a phase, a beginning of a project, I might have something called the planning phase. And in the planning phase, I'm going to develop rough sketches of the work that's going to be done in each phase. So what's the work I'm doing in the planning phase? Well, I'm planning and I'm developing plans. Okay. If I had a phase called um, prototyping, well, the work that's going to be done in that phase would be um, the design and implementation of smaller scaled models. Okay, and that's the work that's being done in that phase. I may have phases that include things like quality assurance. And so, what's the work that's done in that particular phase? Well, it would be going over my baseline plans and ensuring that I'm following those plans and am I deviating from my baseline in any particular way, right? So that would be considered the work. So phases have work that's going to be done, something that you're going to actually do. Remember, one of the descriptions of a project that we got earlier on in the class was that it used resources, right? You can't have a project that doesn't use any resources. So phases are using resources. So in other words, they're doing work. So we're going to identify what the work that's going to be done at a high level, not specific, and we're not talking about actual individual tasks. Because I'm going to swing this hammer and nail those two boards together. No, we're not even in a real project management plan, we would never get that far down. Instead, we're going to say, in this phase, we're going to construct the life support system of the rocket. That's the highest level, right? You're not describing how, you're just describing the what work is going to be done. So, because we have work that we're going to do, that also means that or it implies that we have this thing called a deliverable. At the end of each phase, you're going to turn in your work, right? You're going to here's the life support module, poof, done. Or here are the 15 plans that I worked on, done. Here's my report of satisfactory completion of my quality assurance inspection. Those are all deliverables. The thing that you're done with at the end of that phase. You're going to describe who's involved. In other words, my system engineers will be involved in this particular phase, or my testing and evaluation crew is going to take the output created from the previous phase and they're going to put it through static code testing and dynamic fuzzy testing. Okay, so that's the who. Who's involved? It might be multiple parts of your team. It might be a single part of your team, or maybe everybody. I don't know, but you'll spell that out here in your phase description. And then how are you going to control and improve the work? Okay, so key bits here. Let me review. Life cycle methodology is, what does your project look like from the beginning conception of your project all the way to the completion? And what do those phases look like? And we're going to describe each of those phases. And then that is what we can use to describe our project to our senior leadership, to our key stakeholders, to our team members, right? It's a communication tool, and it's something that you can put on the wall and say, this is where we are in the project, okay? Recap on the deliverable. The deliverable is the product, service, thing that you've produced in the phase itself. Okay. All right. Now, every single phase has an ending. The ending, we have to have some kind of measure to let us know, did we get there, right? Did we complete the thing that we said we're going to do? Okay. And so what we call these are kill points or phase exits or gates, any one of those terms that indicates I know when I'm done. Okay. So when the timer goes off on the soup that I'm cooking, okay, so the phase is the cooking of the soup. How do I know it's done? The timer rings a bell, ting, and that's my phase point, right? My kill point, my exit point, my gate, and I can then at that point go back to the kitchen and say, turn off the ringer, and taste the soup or inspect that it's done. And if the deliverable meets the criteria, then we say we had a successful pass and say we can move on to the next phase. So what happens if the phase isn't successful? So the timer goes off, ding, I'm in the cooking phase, right? So I go into the kitchen, turn off the timer, and I check the soup, and the soup's not done cooking yet. Well, then I failed my exit point or my kill point. So the kill point gets its term because at that point, I can decide to kill the whole project, right? If my phase was not successful, I could say, you know what, it's not worth doing. We're done. We're going to kill the project. That's where that comes from. Now, in a lot of cases, if it's not successful, we'll give it more resources or we'll go back into the phase and continue the phase on. There's lots of decisions you can make. But the point is we come to a point where we get a go or no go decision. Yes, I'm ready to move on, or no, I'm not ready to move on. And so that's that exit criteria. And you need to spell it out for every single phase that you're in. Okay. Yes, so that is part of section 3 or module 3. Okay, now let's go over some of the predictive life cycle methodologies. This is not an exhaustive list, but where do you get an exhaustive list? Well, you do a literature review and you can come up with all the different kinds of models that are out there. I like to use something called a hybrid model, which would be my project doesn't necessarily follow the water, for example, the waterfall model all the way through. I might have phases that themselves have their own specific type of life cycle methodology. So I can mix and match. And that's what the beauty of making I can describe my project in terms of its overall methodology. Okay, so predictive, great for projects that are well defined or maybe very complex. And we're going to walk through the project in a linear fashion. So we have this well defined project. We have when we're done with a phase, we move on to the next one and we don't go backwards, right? So hence the waterfall. Work on a phase, complete it, drop down to the next one, work on that phase, complete it, drop down, work on the next phase, and so forth, right? Now, in reality, we do go back and we can review, but overall, that's still called the waterfall method. Another very, very common model is the spiral. So think of a waterfall methodology. Like I go through planning, well, I might do like, okay, let's just do it. I'll go through planning and then I'll go through um, um, permitting, and then I'll go through design, and then I'll go through execution and delivery. Okay, and that would be the life cycle. That's the waterfall methodology. But what if that's just for block one of my release, right? And now block two comes along, and I use the same methodology to do block two. Well, then that would be a spiral because now I come back to the beginning of what that project would look like and I do the same steps again, but just for the next version of the release. So I'm repeatedly doing the same kind of thing. It's like a waterfall model that's turned back on itself and just goes round and round and round in circles. Okay. So that would be spiral. Incremental, another predictive life cycle methodology that's very common. And the example I like to use for this one is, um, let's say we're building, we bought a plot of land out in the fields, out down in Chehalis. We've got lots of land out there. We're going to build a farm. Okay, awesome. Phase one of the plan is I'm going to build my house. All right, so I go through maybe the waterfall methodology or maybe some kind of spiral methodology to build the house itself, uh, foundation, framing, electrical, roofing, insulation, whatever. Boom, done. So there's my life cycle. However, then instead of a spiral where I come back and do that again, what I'm going to do now is say, okay, now that that project's done, I'll wait till I have enough money and I'm going to go build the barn now. So on that, it's part of the same project. The overall project is I'm going to build me a farm. And that farm's going to have a house, a barn, a woodshed, a carport, I don't know, whatever else. But each one of those are separate mini projects and they're incrementally added to the thing. So overall, I can say, here's my 10-year plan to build my farmstead. And in the first phase is the house. Okay. And now inside of that house, I'll have a waterfall method of how that is going to be built. Okay. So a hybrid model, the overall methodology, incremental, individually phases could look like waterfalls. And then inside of the waterfall will have its own individual phases. Right. So you can see how you can really mix and match these things together. Another really common thing is you prototyping, and we've all heard what that is. We know what that is, right? So it's a smaller scale and it is designed as a proof of concept kind of vehicle. Okay. Here's this new technology. We don't know if it's going to work. So phase one of my project is to build a prototype, deploy the prototype, evaluate success or failure, and then make adjustments to the project, and then come back in and do maybe another prototype. What does that look like? Well, shoot, I might have a hybrid model where I'm using a overall spiral methodology for the development of my rockets to go to Mars, but each prototype is the spiral, right? So I'm spiral, I should say it separately. Spiral one is prototype one. Okay. Now I build the prototype, and in that prototyping, I might use a waterfall type model. Okay. I build the thing, I deploy it, evaluate it, spiral, come back and say, okay, I want to do another prototype incorporating those decisions. So now I'm getting into some really cool, I can get some real cool life cycle methodologies that describe what my project looks like. How am I going to execute my project? Okay, now let's get into the realm of non-predictive. Okay, now what we're talking about is rapid application development, RAD. So these are systems. This is a category of system. It's not like I might be able to go out and buy a RAD system, but I'm going to look at RAD systems, and there'll be lots of different systems that I could use to do my integrated development environment, IDEs or whatnot. These are tools that allow me to do quick updates and many and quick deliverables, right? So not what you would do with a predictive life cycle. Predictive means that I have a pretty good understanding of what the overall thing's going to be. My customer requirements aren't really going to change dramatically, and I have a good understanding. So boom, it makes sense to do something predictive. In software development, inside of IT development specifically, like you don't get RAD development within construction. Okay, construction is going to be predictive, right? You don't really do a scrum to build a building. Now, software, on the other hand, I can attack small parts of the project, try out some new technology, see if it works. A customer requirement changes, we do a delivery, and that spawns off a new requirement for the. All of that stuff lives in the realm of software development, and so RAD is that model. Underneath Agile, Agile is an umbrella that talks about RAD models. Okay, like Scrum, for example. Remember, Scrum is not a methodology. Well, Scrum is a specific methodology that falls underneath the larger umbrella of Agile or rapid application development. Okay, rapid application development is a tool under Agile. Scrum is a tool under Agile. All right. RAD is specifically designed to do that continuous software development, contiguous software integration, right? We hear CI/CD. That's RAD. Scrum is an agile methodology that has a structure to it. And we'll see some slides to that in just a second. I would love to have been in class and ask you guys if you've been involved with Scrum. And if you haven't, I would share some things with you. I know that Dr. Dvorak uses Scrum quite a bit, so you'll be well versed in it. I'm old school, so all of my projects that I did when I was active duty and working in the Department of Defense were predictive life cycle because I didn't do software development per se. I would do building of networks, enclaves, connectivity between network systems and whatnot. So those are all predictive kind of things. So I've not been involved in the Scrum. However, you will certainly be involved in Scrums, and that will be something that employers want you to have some expertise in. Okay, so that's this stuff here. Now, in class, through these weeks of the class, we're going to follow some really easy project, this really easy project that we're going to use as in-class examples so that I can describe something to you, okay? So in class, our project will be the peanut butter and jelly class project. We've all made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, therefore it's a super easy project, but it's going to allow us to talk about these different concepts. All right, so I've decided as the project manager for the peanut butter and jelly class project that it's going to be a waterfall methodology. Why? Because predictive works really, really well with it. It's well known, it's understandable, it's low risk, low uncertainty, and so waterfall works. So I will have described the reasoning behind selecting that life cycle methodology in the section of the project management plan that describes the management approach. Okay, specifically, what are the phases? Well, I think this should be a planning phase, a logistics phase where we gather up the material, a training phase where we make sure that everybody knows how to make and sell sandwiches, an execution phase where we actually do the work, and then a cleanup phase that, you know, cleans up everything and does account reconciliation and whatnot. And so that's what my project looks like. So there's my life cycle methodology, and I would be able to describe that. Okay, so in section 3, where I write what is my management approach, it's this. Here it is. There's my life cycle methodology. Now, I also have to describe each of the phases. So right after I describe the overall methodology, now what I need to do is I need to go in and start describing each of those phases. And remember what I said, we have these different pieces, right? Well, what's the activity? This is the work that's going to be done. Who's working on those activities? Who is doing that work? What are the deliverables? In this first bit here, the activity is that the project manager and the team leads develop plans and obtain approvals. Now I've described what actually is going on in that phase. What are the deliverables? Well, the HR, quality and safety, logistics, and execution plans are created. So what's the deliverable? All those plans. What's the gate or kill point? Well, the project manager, me, I have to approve each of the plans and all the necessary approvals that they were obtained. So if all the plans are satisfactory and the approvals were gained, now I can say we're done with the planning. If this is not true, then we're not done with the planning and we have to go back and either correct the work or maybe kill the project. Maybe we can't get the approvals. No matter how hard we try, we can't get the approvals. Now I say, you know what, the project's dead. There's no sense in moving forward with the project because I can't get out of that phase. Okay. So I've got to describe each one. So what's the next phase? Logistics. All right, I'm going to describe the activities, what's being done and who's doing it. What are the deliverables? What is the thing that is going to be produced when I'm done with this phase? What's the evaluation criteria to get me out of that phase? What's the gate or kill point or exit criteria, whatever you want to call it? And I do the same thing with training and execution and cleanup. This right here, this slide number 4 in this deck right here, this is what you're going to write for your homework assignment, right? So we'll see that at the end of the class. All right, another word on project phases. Those phases at the beginning of your project are most likely going to incur the lowest amount of risk, the lowest amount of resources, and project stakeholders have the highest opportunity to change your project. Why is that? Because you're still shaping the project, right? You haven't really set anything completely in stone yet, and you haven't actually built a lot of the project. So that's what those early phases typically look like. In the middle of your project, those phases will certainly be working toward reducing uncertainty. Why? Because you're figuring out if this criteria, if the technology works, for example. You are determining whether some of those uh, um, unknowns, right? The uncertainties of your project, whether they worked or didn't work. But we're also starting to use a lot more resources. In fact, in the middle, you may use the most amount of resources. Why? Because you'll see a little bit of a slope where at the beginning, resource use is really steady and low. And in the middle, we start ramping up. Why? Because this is where we're doing all the heavy lifting, right? And then towards the end of the middle, we're finished with most of the work and our resource usage drops off again right at the end. Why? Because at the end, we're checking now to make sure that everything we did for the project was met. Did we meet all the customer requirements? Are all the criteria satisfied? Are all my contracts complete? And so all those types of activities happen at that part of the project. So you can kind of look at a project and look at the phases of the project and kind of get a sense of where they are based off of these kind of characteristics. Okay. In the beginning, highest level of risk and uncertainties there. You're not using a lot of resources, but it's really flexible. In the middle, you're getting things done. You're spending a lot of money and a lot of resources. And in the end, you're done with spending a ton of money. But at that point, what we're doing is we're checking and double checking and verifying that we've met goals and whatnot. Okay. In the beginning, back when the cavemen walked the earth, when I was around, Waterfall was the go-to. It was the life cycle methodology. Now, of course, we have much more to choose from, and so we can adapt and make some meaningful methodology choices. Um, Remember what agile means: quick, changing, flexible, easy, lots of deployments. It's super, super powerful inside of software development, um, and often is involved with some kind of hybrid version of predictive lifecycle methodology for the entire project, but then agile for certain development phases within the project. Okay, other words that need to go with agile: interactive, or that's not interact, it's iterative and incremental. Iterative and incremental. Um, I think that's all I have to say on that one. Okay. Agile's the new shiny thing. So scrum everything. Everything's a scrum. Um, that's when old guys like me step up and say, not so fast. Just because you have this really cool hammer in your toolbox doesn't mean that everything is a nail. Um, Use the right tool for the right job. Um, Predictive life cycle methodologies more than likely are what you're going to be using in your projects. Some of you might have a good software project that entails using Scrum or Agile. Great, do that. But just because it's the cool thing doesn't mean that that's always the right tool to use. You guys can read those as just as well as I can. All right, so let's look at Scrum. What does Scrum look like? You can scour the internet and come up with whatever diagrams you want to look like. This is a decent representation, I think. There's one in your book that is pretty good as well, but they're not all the same. So these general pictures make a lot of sense to talk about. So let's talk about the methodology, the pattern of work that happens within a Scrum. Um, Trivia question for you guys. Do you know what Scrum is? Scrum is a term used in rugby, right? So if you've ever watched rugby, you'll notice at times it's kind of like a jump ball in basketball, but in rugby, if the ball is loose and it either side can have it. What the rest do, but they put in the middle, and each team takes one half of a circle, and they all lock arms and hutch, is that a word? Crouch, lock arms and it's crouch down, and they form this great big massive humanity. And then when the whistle blows, the goal is to get the ball through your feet to the outside of your side of the circle. And so the scrum represents a lot of busy, brutal work, all tight together and all quick in order to get some short thing done, which is get the ball to your side and out underneath everybody's feet. All right, so let's look at what that looks like here. Your overall project, you can think of in terms of this product. Come back. This product backlog. Okay, so this guy right here is everything that I have to do would be considered some task on this overall list. Okay, so making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich would involve getting all my supplies together, training people, um, buying the foodstuffs, spreading the bread, putting the breads together, cutting the bread, uh, packaging the bread in some kind of bag, and then selling it, right? So all those are steps. And so I can look at each of those as a thing on my product backlog. Now, my project manager is responsible for that entire list and then deciding and helping the teams decide what we're going to have available for my sprint activity. Okay. So I'm going to build a sprint backlog based off of some subset of my product backlog. But these items here in the sprint backlog are all related together and is doable within a short period of time, right? I'm going to take this bite. It's like a piranha, right? So the elephant steps into the water and it's a whole school of piranhas attack it, right? They're all taking nibbles out of that product backlog. So the product backlog would be the leg that the elephant sticks into the water. So that's what's going to go into my sprint backlog. So a sub portion of my product backlog is going to go onto the sprint. Now the Scrum Master, not necessarily the project manager, but the Scrum Master, and it could be the project manager, don't get me wrong, is now in charge of that sprint, managing the sprint backlog and managing that sprint period, that short period of time, somewhere between a week to 4 weeks. You decide how long that's going to be. And in that short, like month-long period, every day you're going to have a stand up where the scrum master says, okay, what did you do from last week? This is what I want you to do today. What did you do yesterday? Here's what I want you to do today. These daily stand-ups are short meetings, short, short, short. The literature says 15 minutes. All right. Just long enough to get the work done. We don't want to eat up all of our time sitting in these long planning meetings. When were the long planning meetings? They were the ones that decide what was going into the sprint backlog. Now that the sprint backlog is created, the scrum master whoosh, with the whip sends everybody off on their daily goals. All right, you two people do this, you two people do this, and the three of you guys do this. Okay. And then they go off and they work like crazy for that day. I should say crazy. They work on those tasks for that daily work. Okay. And then the next day when they get back together again, they report on here's what we created. We're able to do this. We've got partially through it. We still need more time on it. Whatever the thing is, they give a short description and then they get their new orders for the day and then they blast off. The idea here is that at the end of the sprint, you have a finished product. So we have selected a sprint backlog that when complete will have some deliverable part of my product. And now that goes out the door and gets added to the completed pieces parts over there. And then we go back in and we update our sprint backlog with some more work. And then the scrum master takes over and decides who's working each day. We do the daily stand-ups and we move on like that. So this thing is repeated over and over and over again until the product backlog is complete. Lots of incremental deliveries, lots of changes every single day. When they have their little sprint stand-up or their daily stand-up, the scrum master can make changes and say, okay, we're not making any headway over there, so we need to put more resources, or you name it. They're going to be reacting to changes on the ground. Okay. Last topic, SDLC, software or systems development lifecycle. I call it software development lifecycle. So the systems development lifecycle is the framework. So that's everything. So I can say that your life cycle methodology for your project is your project's SDLC. That simple. It's either going to be predictive or it's going to be agile. Agile encompasses the adaptive software development lifecycle. Part of what RAD uses, describes the Scrum methodology. So it's either agile or predictive. Okay, assignments. We are continuing on with selecting your individual projects. I have received a couple of emails, not very many, on ideas and provided some feedback. It is now coming due pretty soon. So on the 14th, so what is that from now? I can do math, 14 minus 6. Okay, so we have just over a week. Don't forget, send me a note and I'll be happy to weigh in and give you suggestions one way or the other. What do I want you to do? I want you to write a paragraph. Tell me what the title is. What's the primary key deliverable? Who's the primary sponsor? Who are stakeholders? How long will it take? Roughly. What's your rough budget? How many billions of dollars is it going to be? What type of skill sets are you going to need to work your project, right? So all of these things here will help me help you pick a project that'll be fun and effective in its use of hitting all of the project management framework. Okay. No specifics. Okay, good. Now the big thing that's due. So I was trying in a perfect world, I would have given you this assignment on the 2nd of September. Okay. I know you've looked ahead. I hope you've looked ahead through Moodle, so you've already read it and seen it and know what to come. But we hadn't talked about the lifecycle methodology and project phase plan until today, the 6th. So if we need more time to complete it, instead of turning it in on Sunday the 14th, you and I can discuss that and we can come up with a fair and reasonable time period for you to turn that in. Okay. How am I going to, what am I going to do? So I want you to read the instructions very closely. Okay. I'm looking for a approximately 3-page paper using the APA style guide. Okay, so that's double, well, it's double spaced. It's 11 font, either Times New Roman or Arial. You won't have any issues with that if you take the template that I provide for you, download it, save it, and then copy it over to this and then use it. Okay. 3-page paper. You're going to describe your life cycle methodology and your phase plan. So how do I expect your paper to be written? I expect an introduction paragraph. I expect a main body that has a life cycle methodology description, and then a main body that talks about your overall phase plan, and then subsections that describe each of the phase plan in your project. And that should take about 3 pages. Okay, how am I going to grade it? Well, I'm going to grade it right here. 40 points are possible. 50% of the paper will be based off of your writing skills. So this is where formal writing, uh, active versus passive, no conversational, that kind of stuff, right? Is your grammar good? Or is the paper structure good? I'm going to give 35% to your phase plan description and 15% to the life cycle methodology description. Okay. So here's a perfect paper. All X are outstanding. XXX, boosh, down here, points all added together, raw. And if you don't make anything late. So what if we don't change the date and we keep to the 14th, then if you turn it in on the 15th, it would be 1 day late, and you can see what that does to your score, right? If you're 2 days late, another 10%, 3 days late, another 10%. So it quickly adds up super fast. So after we pick the final due date, and again, we can talk about this on Tuesday, but if you need more time than that, we'll change the date, and then that'll be the new due date. Okay, I hope that helps. And again, thank you for your flexibility for this week. It's been a difficult week for me, but I appreciate your flexibility and getting through this week. And I hope that, well, I'm looking forward to being in the classroom next week with you guys and being able to talk about all this stuff. Maybe answer any questions that you had about this material. And that's it. So have a great weekend, and I will talk to you guys very, very soon.